in 2016 on a movie in Las Vegas, New Mexico. And since then, Kendra and I have developed this very cool friendship. And I feel like we were sort of running these parallel lives where she was kind of a hippie. I was a punk, but we sort of ended up in the same place. And it's been really cool to see some of her creative endeavors. She's directed short films, she's designed feature films. Right now, she's working as an art coordinator. And in January, she published a book that she wrote during the pandemic. Kendra, let's talk about your book.
Jhene, let's talk about you first, though, for 1 minute. So, Jhene is one of my best friends in the world, and we have worked on movies in different states. She's a director, and she has a movie coming out called Summertime Dropouts. We don't know
That Kendra designed.
That she let me design up in Minnesota. And she's made so many wonderful, beautiful, magical short films, and does photography shoots and designs all kinds of things, and just a beautiful person. So
thank you.
Thanks for doing this with me, Jhene.
Yes, I wouldn't be anywhere else. So let's talk about the world in which you write this book. It's the pandemic. Everybody's hysterical, suffering from insane cabin fever. And one of the interesting things about the way this book starts is it starts with a storm, and it's all these things being out of place, which is very interesting because the world that we're in, everything's out of place, and we're living our lives in an opposite fashion. So do you want to talk a little bit about that tension that was going on and how it led to this story?
Well, I think for me, like the beginning of quarantine, even though everything was so and remains uncertain, there was a part of me that was kind of glad to have a break. It's like we obviously both work in the film industry, and it can be really hard to take a break because you are afraid people are going to forget about you and then not call you again, So it was kind of cool that we were forced to take a break. Everybody's forced to take a break, so that you could do other creative things. Meanwhile, there's obviously a very serious situation happening outside of our homes, so you can't even leave, and then you don't know what your future holds, if there is any kind of future even. But so for me, I basically just treated this the same way I would treat myself with any kind of depression. and I know what the things are that I need to get through something like that. And I have to write every day, read every day, eat the right things. And so for me, that was part of this. So I've been reading much more because of quarantine, and I had read this book that was a bestseller, and I thought I liked it, but I didn't fully understand like what was it that made it mind blowing. It's probably just like me not being able to see. Like there's something that I'm not noticing about it. But I had kind of this feeling like maybe I could do that. So I opened up one of my old documents and found this book that I had written a while ago, and decided that I would work on it and just get it done. So I really basically rewrote pretty much the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. What from that version made it over then?
What made it?
Like what sorts of things? What, like this character who's got this rare affliction? Like, is that in your first version? Yeah. Okay.
So in Stitches, you have a character who very early on goes through what might be a botched surgery, and he loses his hearing and his sight. And so you get to see through each person's perspective. There's a family here. You see through the mom, the dad, and all of that. And so that format has always remained the same. There's always been a character, Alexia, who's this kind of like delinquent niece. And she's been sent to live with this family in Baltimore because her family thinks it's going to be a better life for her. Turns out that they live in complete poverty. And of course, they have a son who is now disabled. Um, and so all of that kind of thing was always there. It always took place in Baltimore. It was always, borderline kind of Southern goth,
Mhm.
and that's always remained the same. So for you, of course, you've read the book. So basically, once you get about halfway through, I just cut all that part off. I just had to admit to myself, I was like, I've never liked any of this stuff. So I threw all that out and really just started from scratch again. So
I think this
yeah,
book is interesting because you can see so much of you in it. Like if you know anything about you, something that tastes that touches Baltimore, the road trip thing, you've got a history of working as a driver a little bit. And
yeah,
so some of like
yeah.
the romanticism about being on the road. And then, of course it touches on New Mexico. And I find
Yeah.
it so cool to know you and get to read it because so much of you is in it.
Oh, cool.
Even from, and I had mentioned this to you before, but um, I feel like there are parts of this book that are in the same color palette as your living room. There's this, um,
What
there's
does
this
that look like
world
to
that
you? I want to
what's
know
that?
what you mean.
I always call it like a desaturated. Oh gosh, the really precious director. Um, oh, I'm
Wes
missing
Anderson.
Wes Anderson, like a
Okay.
desaturated Wes Anderson. To me, it's like I've never seen you in one of these, but it's like corduroy suit jackets with elbow patches, kind of stuff. Um, and then
Yes.
there was this moment, and it was so interesting because it's like it's earlier on in the book, but Alexia picks up this pillow, and there's this gray stain on the underside of it, and I thought
Yeah.
that was such an interesting detail because I feel like that's one of those weird experiences nobody ever talks about, but probably every single person has picked up a pillow that's had this like mysterious gray stain on the underside of it. Like it just is something that belongs there. It's this strange tethering to reality in this world that is so different from the world that we're living in. Especially the book takes place in like 2000. Is it 2004? So it
Yeah.
was like Hurricane Ivan. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, it was kind of a breath of fresh air to not be talking about um, the collective illness that we're living in right now. They
Right.
had this freedom in that time that we just don't have.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a time when we were I mean, people had cell phones, but not everybody. We certainly didn't have really like smartphones or anything. It was a different time.
How do you feel like writing the book helped you deal with depression over this time? I think creating art during dark places of the soul is always
Yeah.
helpful. What was your takeaway writing a book at that time?
I think it's a good escape for me. And like I think when people say escape, a lot of times they think that they're just kind of like checking out, but it's a lot more for me like just really deeply focusing on something, you know. And so getting into like the finest details of what I'm working on, you know. And this is like a little, it's not the happiest of books, as one of my friends said. But I forget how she worded it, but it was pretty close to that. Um, but so I I'm publishing it like in a sense for a really good friend of mine who had passed away, you
Mm-hmm.
know? And so he was somebody, he always wanted me to publish it, and he specifically wanted me to publish it in this way where it would be self-published. And I was like, can't say I was against it, but I just didn't feel like the story was ready, and then I was kind of done working on it back then, you know. So the other thing, like, about having this time period where it's like, okay, now I have time to work on my art, I have time to like work on myself, you know. I was like, okay, here's something I can move through. It's like, you know, when your best friend, you know, passes away. So um it was really, I don't know, I guess this, I mean, to be honest, it was healing, you know, because I was like writing this story, thinking about my friend every single day, imagining him being there with me, and going through this process and getting to the end of the story just felt like I was getting to the end of this thing I had to go through with him, in a sense, you know.
Because he's passed. How long has he been passed now?
3 years. Yeah.
Do you
So,
want to talk a little bit about one of the things that came up with him during this period of time? The
oh, you mean like during while writing it?
mm-hmm.
Well, like I said about him sitting across from me, like it was weird because so my best friend Harry and I used to write every single day, and we'd write across from each other, and so that was been one of those things that I've missed. Like I had a writing partner. We didn't write together, like we didn't write stories together, but like we bounced ideas off of each other. And he would
And
say
having
stuff, and
somebody
I'd be like,
create next to you is so inspiring anyway.
oh, I miss that. I love that kind of thing. I love it, you know? So it was weird because I just kept feeling like I would look up and I would be like, I feel like he was like sitting across from me. I was like, this is so cool. And I would feel like I would be checking in. I'd be like, are you cool with this part? And he'd be like, all right. So yeah, there was that. That's all sad stuff, kind of, but I don't know. It is part of the story, you know? So,
Well, there is sort of a thoughtful dreariness in all of it. Like I feel like there was not enough rain during the time that I was reading this book. Like this is like the perfect book to read to a rainy day. Um,
oh, yeah.
but
Right.
it's also thoughtful, and there is a human magic in it as well. And I was really interested in how you developed some of these female characters, because they all of them really do feel like they're being motivated by their own lives. They don't feel like backdrops for the story to happen around them.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
Yeah. I mean, well, don't isn't the interesting thing, so it's like this family with bad luck, um and it's like black sheep of the black sheep, all of them. None of them truly like fits
Yeah,
in
that's true.
anywhere.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, you have Freya, who is the mom in the story, and she's from Norway. So half the family, you know, is from Norway. The other half from originally Alabama. Um, when they had to move to Baltimore, a place nobody wanted to live, um, because they had good hospitals there, essentially, you know. Um, but yeah, so you have Freya, and she's somebody who probably had a lot of light in her life and when she was younger. You know, and then it's just been kind of having to sit it out, you know. Just kind of move through life. And then you have Alexia. She's freshly 18 and full of life. And yeah, and then something that you learn early on in the story, so I kind of don't mind like saying it, you know. It's like I think it's within the first 10 pages or something. You learn that Alexia's family has been like kind of plagued by like the by suicide, almost like this like contagious thing. Everybody's knocking themselves off, you know.
Well, the
And
suicide sort of reminded me of like a greatest hits of just amazing suicides you'd read in history. I can't remember who it was. It was like the woman in the Victorian dress who'd like shoved rocks in her pockets to drown herself. Like
Virginia Woolf.
Virginia Woolf, yes.
Yes.
But yeah, that's immediately what I transported to.
Name that suicide.
Name that suicide.
It's awful.
Yeah, so they're plagued with suicide.
Yeah. Yeah. And so her whole thing, like you and I talked about this a little bit like a week ago, but it's like, that she's not going to do it. She's not going to. So I don't know. Yeah, I would say I hope that the women are pretty like strong characters and you can feel them and that they feel different from each other. Yeah. I don't know
I
what
think
else to
it's
say about
funny how
women.
you add this 18-year-old girl into this house, and she really does feel like a danger in that house, sort of. It feels unnerving for her to be in that place. Like they are not really able to make space for her in a sense, just like emotionally, it seems like. And she sort of functions as like what they're afraid of, which I just find super interesting. Um,
Thank you.
yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about the journey into self-publishing and what some of that process was like?
Let's see, what can I say about that? Yeah.
Well, so
I
you had
mean,
to come up with a cover. Like I love this cover,
yeah.
and then it's
Thank
got
you.
that hand that you didn't really ask for on the back, but I absolutely love that image. So, I mean,
I love that you know me well enough to say that. The hand that you didn't ask for, but it's all right. It's good.
but I mean, it's I just loved hearing about it because it's something you don't really think of. Like books have covers. Somebody has an idea for a cover. They go about making a cover, whether that's a photo shoot or in this case, having somebody literally stitch something by hand and then doing photographs of that or
Yeah.
scans of that. I don't even know exactly what that's like. And so you're collaborating on something that I don't think the average person even thinks
Yeah.
about. And so I guess some of what I'm asking is like, that's not something I had really thought about. So that's
Yeah.
one process. My friend had worked in bookstores, and the barcode on the back is called an ISBN. So you probably had to figure out how to get one of these so that you could sell it online and
Right.
get your book registered to that, because I think the ISBN is like a fingerprint for the book, so it stays with the book forever. Because I think that when you think about publishing something, the average person just has no idea how to even get started with that in a time
Right.
when that stuff is more available and accessible to us than ever before.
Yeah. It's actually been a really cool process. Like, so I've kind of always been, and I think you're this way too, Janae, like kind of grassroots. You're like, if I don't know your system, or maybe I don't even want to be part of your system, like, how can I just create one for myself? Like make the room for yourself.
Yeah.
And so I've always been that way. I've like made my short films without, like, at the beginning where I didn't know anything about making movies, just like, well, this seems like how you would do this, and you just move forward and you make your thing, start from the ground up. And in some ways, perhaps even reinventing the wheel, unfortunately. But yeah, so I mean, it's been a cool process to do this. And I did have to collaborate
All
with
right.
this guy I
Deep
really
breath.
lucked out.
Deep
His name's
breath. We're going
Xavier
to be online for a
Comas, I
second.
think.
In a second.
And we just went back and forth. He asked me questions about the book. We talked about that. He really seemed to, without having read it, really seemed to like take it in and then put it into his own words. I mean, in fact, like the description that he wrote that's online, I think is better than my description about my book. Like, and I'm like, did he read this? Or he's just really good at this. But yeah, so we went back and forth and he would show me, just sending it to me, right? Just like different versions. I might have shown you some a while back. I don't know. But there was like one that was black and white. I liked that idea. Originally, I wanted it to say stitches on the front backwards. Oh, are we backwards? Do you see this forward or backwards?
It's backwards to me. The front looks right and the back looks.
Well, that's
no, I
how
can read
wanted
it correctly this way. Yeah.
So now you get an impression of what I was picturing. Something like that. That's how, yeah. So, but so it is like that's the thing. It's just like in film. It still is a collaboration, you know. I don't think anything is really, I don't know. Like I could take this back maybe a bit really great when it's only one person. It's like you're just making something in a box. And so, oh my God, it's good to have best friends, but no, that is texting the hell out of me. Um, uh, yeah. So we went back and forth, and I'd be like, well, no, I was kind of picturing this, but I didn't want to stifle like what he wanted to do because making book covers is his art. That's his thing. So you got to let that person come up and do the thing that they're good at, and like you said, like he and another person just totally hand stitched it, and took photos. So cool, you know. And the rest of it was just like honest. It was not too complicated. I did ask a friend to do some copy editing for me. But yeah, there was definitely some adulting with all of this, figuring out copyright, all of that, just like, but it's just putting one foot in front of the other. You're like,
Yeah.
okay, how do I make this happen? This, then this, then this, and this. So it's been nice because it doesn't really, I think years ago, self-publishing, it's what we thought people did if they didn't have the skills to be published by a publishing house.
Yeah.
And I think that the world is just different now. You don't have to go through a publishing house, to get your stuff out, to be read, basically.
I think that's so perfect. It allows a lot more outsider work to be published and seen. It's one thing that I've always enjoyed about being in the film industry. I know it bothers a lot of people how accessible it is to make projects, but one of my favorite things when I first started was seeing films by people that were not even going to go on to make films, like seeing somebody who
Yeah.
was going to go on to potentially become an editor, write and direct and create something. And I always felt like, even though they sometimes felt disjointed or weird, I appreciated getting to see something that otherwise I wouldn't have really seen because it
Yeah.
would have been okayed by somebody else.
Oh, that's true. I love that kind of thing. Like, my friend at work gave me this zine of his. Like, this is my background. You know what I mean? Like, I started making zines. So, and I love that kind of thing because you're not going to see this somewhere else, but it's somebody else's perspective that has not been whitewashed,
Yeah.
and I love that. Yeah. Kind of makes me want to write zines again.
I've been thinking about it a lot lately. It's funny you say that.
Let's do it, Jenny.
Yeah.
We'll do it underground.
I was kind of thinking about what you were talking about with collaboration, and I'm not sure if this is something that you would say, but it was sort of what I heard in the background of what you were talking about is like when you're bringing in people to collaborate with you, the intention is for them to make it better, for them to bring something that it wasn't in you already to know
Yeah.
or to have. And so the last thing you want to do is sublimate somebody that's coming in to add something to what you're doing. The hope is that they make it better than you would have on your own.
Totally. Otherwise, do it on your own.
Right.
Make your own cover, make your own movie, play all the parts,
Yeah. Play all the parts.
I've thought about doing that before. And I didn't have any friends. Oh, there was something I was going to say there about collaboration and stuff. Oh, one thing I was going to say earlier is that something that is pretty cool about writing, because, like I do all these different things just like you do. It's like for me, it's like whatever will keep me sane and motivated and moving forward, and it's basically free. If you are lucky enough, to have a laptop and a wireless connection, like you can write a book. You can. it's like, or wireless, whatever, internet connection doesn't have to be wireless. But you know, so it's like I love making movies, but it is really, really expensive, you know. And it takes a lot of organizing, and I love all that stuff. But if you can't do that, you can write a novel and have the movie basically in your head. You can direct it, like, even though we're talking about collaboration, but there is this part that's like, okay, I get to direct it, I get to act all the parts out, you know, I get to think about each person in the story and make it arc where I want it to arc and edit it how I want to edit it. And I think it's, to me, it's just so cool. And like for me, it's also like just where I started. It's like my first art form ever since I was a little kid, you know, just like as long as I had some paper and a pen, I was okay, you know.
Yeah.
Um,
That's sort of interesting. I mean, I definitely can relate to that because I remember when you were shooting, were they 48-hour film projects? There were some 48-hour film projects that you were doing during the pandemic. And I remember
all right.
it coming to this point where there was nobody to hold the camera for you. And so you're like taping your camera to your ceiling fan. And so yeah,
Yeah,
I can definitely see how writing is just a project for one, and you don't need a second person to hold anything for you. You can just kind of dive in.
it is. Yeah. Gosh, hear you say that though. This pandemic has so been so crazy, you know? You're like everybody just trying to stay. Tell me something you've done, Janae, that like you're like, okay, this is me just trying to stay sane.
That
What
was
is
my
something you
Lego polka dot wall where I
oh,
hand
no.
probably 100 cardboard chips and then hand painted each one, and I had to paint them in color batches, and then I spaced them out and applied them to my wall using well, you'll know what this is, but like using an art department like tape sandwich so I didn't mess up the paint. So it was like every single
Yeah. Okay.
cardboard chip had like painter's tape on it, and then snot tape, and then painter's tape to go against the wall. And then I was so paranoid about taking it down later that I had like created tabs on all the paper tape so that I wasn't having to scrape it off the wall, that there was already kind of a pull tab on it.
That's smart. Good idea.
Yeah, so that took a long time. I was doing things like that where it was like, well, as you know, so I moved into that apartment in February, and then the world shut down in March. So it was like I just lived in this
Yeah.
apartment toiling away with all these like little art projects like nobody was ever going to see. Like
Right.
one of the last
Yeah.
projects I was working on that I'm still working on is I built this like it's almost like a 5 foot moon that I've just been painting with different kinds of glitter for like 2 or 3 months now. Like,
I love it.
yeah,
I
mine was
love it.
a lot more tactile. I felt like
Yeah.
I struggled so much to stay on topic. I did feel, I think my trauma response was a little bit different. Like I struggled to stay on task. So beyond coming up with the idea in the first place, I had a hard time like sitting down to focus on anything unless it was tactile and I was doing it with my hands.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so it was cool to hear that you were able to like focus intellectually, because that's just not something I was able to do.
Right. Yeah, I think it's just affected people in different ways and at different ways at different times, you know?
Mhm.
Like maybe you would be able to now, or maybe I wouldn't be able to now, you
Right.
know? It's like to do something intellectual, you know, or have to do something only with my hands. I don't know. It's really is interesting to think about how people have been dealing with quarantine, and I know that it's been the topic, like, you know, for a year now, basically. Um, but it is fascinating, you know, to think about all the things that people have learned and all the skills that they have gained from their hobbies. You know, what have they learned? Ways that people have accomplished or stopped accomplishing, you know, and more like started to work. I mean, accomplishing outward in the world and started to work on things inside of themselves, I don't feel like the same person I was a year ago. I don't know about you,
No, I
but
don't.
yeah.
I think one of the things is that, and I don't know why this was so hard for me to do for myself, but if I felt bad, like I was just okay with like only doing what I could do at the time. Like the big thing for me
Mm,
over the last year was giving myself permission to go through what felt like trauma sometimes, to
yeah.
if I was feeling happy to like to just to not feel guilty about whatever that roller coaster was going to roller coaster is kind of intense, but to just allow myself to feel bad if I was feeling bad and to not to try and remove myself from judging my emotional life so heavily and when I was creating and when I was not creating, because I think as an artist, I don't know what it's been like for you, but I always feel more productive when I can add another movie on my resume or um,
Right. Yeah.
be part of like fashion designing an art shoot or something. It's like it feels like you've accomplished something once those outside works are completed. And
Mm,
without having work to validate me in that way, it like changed the way I thought about myself. And I think it was a conversation that was happening all over the country where a lot of people were having a hard time
mm,
figuring out what their purpose was without having work back that idea up.
right. Yeah. Yeah, I had friends who immediately, as soon as like their shows, because around here, obviously, for anybody who would be watching elsewhere, like we live in New Mexico, so we're in the film industry. There are lots of people. Almost anybody we know is part of the film industry. I think almost every person I know. So when it became apparent that this COVID was a serious situation, all the shows shut down. And it's just like seemed like an insane emergency, really. It's like, wait, what's happening now? What's happening? 2 days later, another show shut down, and Jhene and I happened to be working on a show together that got shut down way too late. It just kept going. Um, but it was interesting to me at the time because some people, when their shows got shut down, they they plummeted it immediately. you know Friends of mine had the worst time with it. I think because for them, a lot of their identity is tied up in what they're doing in the outside world, and how people see them in that outside world. And to not have the gym to go to not have the show to work on, or whatever it was, some external thing, it was really, really hard on them, you know?
Well, I think the
Um,
other big thing at that time, and it's something I certainly thought about, is like, is there any way for it to even come back? Because you're so used to
yeah.
working shoulder to shoulder with 35 people,
Yeah.
it was impossible to imagine it coming back.
Yeah. Still is, and I'm on a show. Yeah. So,
All right, so I think that we can talk a little bit about what the book's about. Why don't you get us started on that?
yeah. So, at the very beginning, like, and I'm not concerned with like talking about this because it's like literally the first paragraph of the book. Um, you hear that a tornado is coming, or that a tornado happened, and we're going to go back 6 months before this tornado, and start our story. And we're going to learn about all of the characters in this household, the Porter house, basically Porter townhouse in Baltimore. um, but meanwhile, we're also meeting Alexia Olson, who's the 18-year-old, 17 turns 18 in the book. And she lives in Oslo, and she is considered kind of the bad kid, but the reality is that like her family has been just struggling. It's the kind of like the suicidal artists and all of this, and like one person after another who she cares about is checking out, basically, and it is having its effect on her. you know so her grandparents actually say, well, we're going to have you go live with the only other Olsen in the family who doesn't like the only Olsen who doesn't have these problems, basically. And so on her 18th birthday, as if it's a gift, they give her, plane ticket to Baltimore, and in her mind, she's going to like America. It's going to be amazing. There's Hollywood and all this great stuff. But when she gets there, she finds that the way her Aunt Freya, has been living has been in like pretty bad like poverty and like we said earlier, with a son who's about close to Lexia's age, her cousin, who is deaf and blind. Now, she doesn't know anybody, and she's not very good with boundaries. So she befriends him, the two of them. So it's like they, in a sense, that they are each other's only person, you know. But again, she has problems with boundaries because of her delinquency. It's just the way that she is. So
I
that's
mean,
kind of like the premise.
it seems sort of common for, at least when I was growing up, for young women to have boundary issues. And you hear about the way they're raising kids now, where it's like, you shouldn't be encouraging them to hug people. They don't feel comfortable hugging. It's just like, we were the generation where you just sort of had to
Deal with it, yeah.
let loose your ownership of your own body. And so I think that 100% like rings true in that character for me, just having
Yeah.
grown up. Um, and I remember cousins having crushes on cousins too, because I think um, you kind of, that's a trait that we learn. That's not inherent in us to understand the difference
Right.
in those kinds of relationships.
I would say that it's probably pretty normal, it's someone that you haven't maybe grown up around, and so they don't necessarily feel like family to
Mhm.
you, you know.
Well, I
Um,
think the fact that she's separated from her family,
mhm.
it's really easy for her to cling to him because he's the closest thing, to her age, and he's interested in her too. You can definitely, it feels palpable that he's interested in knowing more about her too. And I think he describes her as his cool cousin was coming to stay. So they're just sort
Right.
of like there is like this magnetism between the two of them, this curiosity about each other that kind of pushes them together.
Yeah. Yeah. I really love to write stories and read stories, where there's a romantic relationship that shouldn't happen, or like from our society's point of view, shouldn't happen, or probably cousins shouldn't hook up. you know, um, it's like, I don't know if you ever saw the movie. I think it's called Ollie, Fear Eats the Soul. You ever see
No,
that? It's a German film.
no.
Anyway, it's fantastic. But in it, there's a younger man with a much older woman, and they do fall in love, you know, and and you know, the entire neighborhood is paying attention, and kind of like they're enthralled, like they want to see how this is even happening, but at the same time they're disgusted, but nobody can stop watching, sort of the car wreck kind of thing. But I love that kind of stuff.
Well, let's
Uncommon
talk
really.
about that then, because I think that you're definitely attracted to creating certain kinds of stories, and this one I think is a little bit darker on the spectrum than maybe some of your films. But what attracts you to want to spend this much time like creating a story? What kind of stories do you feel most fulfilled by telling?
Ooh. I guess I try to find something that, um I mean, I always starts with a character, but something that I think, a character that I feel like people normally judge. That's usually where I start. So I'll start with, it's like maybe, um I might read something or whatever it is. It's just something that's like in a daydream that I have, perhaps, and I think about a certain type of person and how they're not received well because people don't understand them. And so then I try to figure out, well, what makes that person that way? And I consider that if you were that person, you would be that person. You know, people are always saying, like, if I were you, I would do it differently. It's like, no, you wouldn't. If you were me, you would be me and you would do it exactly the way that I did it. You know, people are who they are, I think. I don't know. But so I really like to that's one thing that's fun with this for me. Like I'm not gonna say that each character is like lovable, but I hope that each character is knowable. You know, that's what I hope. So but that is something for me. I'm like, okay, what when you see some 17, 18-year-old like young woman who seems kind of like a brat, like a thief, a brat, a bad kid, like what is going on there? You know, when you see this guy who uh is committing a violent crime, this one is a very specific kind, but like, when somebody has done this and you wonder how that came to be, a lot of times we say, well, they must have been abused, and that's often maybe the case. I don't know. But for this character, I won't name which character it is, but it's anxiety. It's straight up anxiety, like he's
Yeah.
having a panic attack, you know? So I don't know. It's like, I play around a lot in these stories, but I guess underneath it, what I'm really looking for is to be honest, just trying really hard to be honest, which is, I think honesty is like not judgmental, you know?
I can definitely feel that now that you say that about
Yeah.
the book. I can definitely say that you achieved that.
Thanks. I was about to say, I don't know if I succeeded in that, but
You did,
that's
because I'm thinking
the
it's like
name.
see judgment in some of the characters, but the way that it's written, there isn't like a judgmental cast over the elements. Yeah, that's really interesting.
Thanks.
It allows people to kind of come up with their own conclusions about it.
Yeah.
In writing it, how did you structure out your days? How do you go about the process on like a technical level? How much time do you spend? Do you write every day? Do you write twice a week? How does that look for you?
I will usually write every day. Um, so I mean, not lately as I'm not working on this novel, but when I'm working on a project, that's usually how that'll work. So yeah, as far as like for me, it's not something like wake up at 6 a.m. and do.
Mhm.
That's not me. Um, it's a lot more like get some coffee. And something that was different for me with this is like I was like so tired of being sitting right here actually, that I started to go to the park every day. I'd go to the park and I would handwrite, just handwrite and handwrite and handwrite, come back and type it or something, Um, I write a lot of stuff in my head first. So that was the other thing is I would say, okay, well, I really need to write this part. I'm having trouble writing. So I'm going to go drive. So I would go maybe drive for 4 hours north, turn around and drive back. And then, it's a little bit dangerous maybe, but I would actually have a notebook and I just like write stuff in it, stuff that I didn't want to forget that I really thought might be an accurate description of someone's feelings or something like that,
Is it common for you to handwrite when you're writing? For
Yeah.
that to be the first wave?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've got notebooks on top of notebooks. It's I can write on the computer, but I do not like to. There's just something about the screen and the way it's all spaced out. I have a lot of trouble with that. So I just write everything by hand. And I always have. Like this is my I guess in a way you can say it's like my fourth novel, and they've all been written by hand and then they're typed up, you know.
How do you get inspired? Like, do you write at the same time every day? It sounds like you were going to the park because I used to write a lot more, and I feel
Mhm.
like I was more productive with my writing when I had a very specific place and a very specific time.
Right.
And then it's kind of like, you're on your way to dinner, and once you get to the restaurant, it's like time to eat. Like you're hungry by the time you get there, sort of thing. So
Right.
I feel like you sort of set up a Pavlovian
Like Pavlov
response
dogs
in
and everything.
yourself,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
To be prepared to, because I hear a lot of people who don't, um, I don't write for a living, but who don't have to write on deadlines, and it feels like they can't ever get to being inspired. And I was thinking, when I was writing on deadline, it's like it's not about being inspired. It's about like just getting in there and wrestling it until it can be filmed or released or whatever it is. It's not a
True.
not that I don't have moments, and I don't love to be ultimately inspired and write, but I just feel like that's such a fairy tale idea about what writing really is.
Yeah.
It's not about that. There's something romantic in it, but it's not every day that you just go out and feel inspired and with your feather pen and your
Oh, no.
writing by the duck
In your
pond.
hat and maybe some rocks in your coat or something, who knows?
So yeah, were you
Wildman with
writing
a coat.
at the same time every day, or how are you approaching um,
Uh,
productivity during the time that you're trying to get stuff done?
well, okay, so it's not the same time every day. Um, but one thing I will say is that like you're right, it's not all roses or anything, like it's not just easy all the time. In fact, it's not easy most of the time. But it's kind of like I've been trying to convince myself to do yoga, right? So every morning. But one way that I go about this is I put out my mat and I tell myself, as long as I've done that every day, I've at least developed kind of the habit, right? So I at least have the habit of putting it out. And some days I'm going to get on the mat and I'm going to stretch, and some days I'm not. But at least it'll still be in my head every single day to do it, you know? And it helps, I've done it almost every day for like 3 months now, you know? And so a lot of times I do like a really similar thing with writing, you know? So it'll be like, okay, well, I'm at least just going to get my notebook out. Can I do that? Can I get my notebook out and put it in front of me and stare at it? Don't look at my phone. Can I just stare at it for 2 minutes, 5 minutes? And like, it just starts to happen. And I don't mean like magic. It's like somebody asking a question and you're not answering it. It feels really awkward to not write. The paper's there, Um, but yeah, I mean, I
I think
guess,
one of the things for me is like just giving myself permission to write anything, just to mark up a blank page. And
oh,
then
totally.
once I've written something that's
Yeah.
bad, I know what it needs to change into. But it's like, if you can just get the floodgates open at all, then you can get to work. But it's like,
Yeah.
it's staring at the
Yeah,
blank page and getting from A to B that feels so difficult sometimes.
totally. I mean, well, so this is what I should have said at the beginning is that before I start writing, I usually write for 20 to 30 minutes. So, yeah, they both are writing because they both involve pen and paper, but it's not the same thing at all, So that first like 20, 30 minutes is like Julia Cameron says, it's like morning pages. So it's just me writing any crap I need to write because if I still have in my mind how someone acted towards me yesterday or so whatever it is, a bad dream, like if I still have that in my mind, it's really hard for me to spend my brain power on my imagination, on the things that I want to be thinking about, because I'm thinking about this other stuff. So I have to like move through that first. And that always helps because by the time I get to like about 30 minutes of writing, just freehand, not caring at all what I'm saying, never going to reread this. I don't reread any of them, you know. By that time, I'm starting to think like, oh, and then maybe Alexia does this, and then maybe Sansa does this, and it's helpful.
Basically, you're talking about stretching before you really start writing, is what it sounds
It
like.
is, yeah. No, it is like that. It is, but I don't try to write anything profound at all during that.
And so it sounds like that
Yeah.
part of our process is a little bit similar.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
And then do you have a minimum amount of time once you set down to do the writing you're intending to do? Do you have like a minimum amount of time, a minimum amount of pages? Like, do you have any parameters like that for yourself in the process?
I don't, because even though we're talking about inspiration, you can write for hours or something. It's like I feel like most of us are really sensitive. Um and it's easy to scare ourselves out of writing, you
Mm,
know, or out of any art. And so I have to like work with all, I'm like, will this possibly scare me out of writing? I can't do it. I can't. If I tell myself that I have to write 10 pages or I have to write for a certain amount of time, if I make it so that it's not fun, it's not fun and I'm not going to want to do it, you
yeah.
know? So I have to just kind of like run with it, you know? I mean, another thing is like, I don't start my books and stuff, I don't start them at the beginning. I start them with the scene that I think is the most interesting, you know? So if it's like I'm the most interested in something that's going to turn up on page 60, maybe, So then I write those scenes and then I write the next thing that seems really fun to me to write. And I write the next thing and then I kind of like stitch them or whatever, but stitch them
So then are
together.
you working off of an outline that
Oh,
you
I'll come up with outlines because they're fun,
yeah.
It's like I like the mental acrobatics of it. But otherwise, it's a lot more like running from inspiration to inspiration. It's like this is what is interesting to me. This scene of a tornado or something, So I feel like writing that right now. So I'm going to write that, you know. And then the next thing that's interesting to me is a scene of somebody jumping off a bridge. Okay, well now I'm going to write that, you know. And then sometimes the structure, like you just said, that I mean, sometimes that's the thing that's interesting to you. It's like, okay, well, then I guess today what I'm doing is writing out a structure. So it's not that Stitches doesn't have one, it does. I mean, I have loads of index cards. Like this whole thing was like full of index cards at one point. So that makes
And
sense.
then you write to music.
Yeah,
What kind of music were you listening to when you wrote this one?
really. I don't want to call it bad. But like I think this summer the hits were basically just coffee shop jazz. Somebody
I
came over and I was writing
have
and they're
music
like, this is
right.
what you listen to now? What?
Oh, I always have to have music when I write. I feel like
Yeah.
it's like this embedded tonal quality to the work is like I almost always start by figuring out the soundtrack to my writing because it just feeds into it by so much. And for me, it's
Yeah.
usually if it has lyrical content, the lyrics aren't louder than everything else.
Yes. A little bit of wallpaper
Yeah,
music.
sonic wallpaper. And then
Yeah.
I will sort of do one of two drinks of choice when I'm writing. My curiosity is like, so I'll either do like rum and coke or rum and coconut water, or I'll do coffee. And I just feel like there's a speed and a that's it's just sort of this other mood that it adds to things.
Yeah.
What are you a coffee writer? Are you a whiskey writer? Both? None?
I'm coffee until I'm whiskey.
I think that's probably yeah.
Yeah. It's like when it seems like it's the appropriate time to move to whiskey, I move to whiskey.
I love like anytime you see a Stephen King movie, the writers always have like a tumbler of whiskey right next to what they're doing, and it's like I think
It's such a stereotype, right?
yeah, but I think that's why like
There isn't.
it was so important to me to figure out different ways to be productive, to not lean on something like that as being the grease to start that machine. Like, no, for sure,
No.
sometimes it helps, but I think that knowing how to do it a lot of different ways so that you don't have to be in this like uh, perfect system to create is like so much more important.
I agree.
Yeah. I've never
I mean,
done the driving and writing thing though. That sounds super interesting.
which thing? I'm sorry, I didn't hear
Making notes while you're driving.
you. I've done it too much, probably, to be honest. I used to do it while I used to be a truck driver. Um, I was a long haul truck driver for a few years after I got a master's degree in writing. And yeah, I look back now and I can't believe I'm like, damn it, because I think driving carefully is so important to me. But even still, I would have my notebook like up on the huge wheel sometimes. I'm just like, there's nobody around, and I would write it down. So you're just thinking for like 10 hours a day.
I mean, I definitely relate to the thinking
Yeah.
and some of that stuff, whatever sticks, sometimes I'll make notes about later, but never actively. I sort of love driving. I think it's like a really amazing way to look at something different and to free your mind up so that you can kind of free associate and let your mind go sort of wild. And I think I only started driving alone cross country um, 2016. It was right before I met you. I drove from LA to Denver by myself for the first time. And
I don't know if I realized that. Okay. Cool.
yeah, so I had gotten out of the hospital and I was on my way to the job that I did right before I met you. And I had left late because I was sick and I just needed to get there. So I drove alone and I was amazed because I thought I was going to be scared and I thought I was going to feel vulnerable. And it was the first time that I got to, like, my brain opened up and um, I didn't have anyone else to talk to. And I was surprised by how much thinking I did and like how much that transformed into ideas I was using right after that. I'd never experienced, I mean, I'd been on road trips, but it was always
With
with
people.
other people. And I think when you're writing with other people, it's a lot of conversation, which I always love. It's usually listening to loud music here and there.
Right.
Um, but you're navigating somebody else's comfort zone there, and it's a totally different
Yeah.
experience when you're
Yeah.
alone.
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah. I mean, I love that. I love everything you just said too. Like, I love driving. I mean, for me, it's like, let me just spit on myself, by the way. Um, let me just choke up my own spit. Um, it's like the part of me that has to be productive is checked off. There's this part of me that feels like I always have to be productive. It's just like the way I was brought up or something. It's like this, like, you know, career and work means more than anything. And in my soul, I don't really like believe that, but I still have that. That's still like part of my being. It's like how I grew up. So for me, driving means I'm doing something.
Mm.
And I love that because I'm doing something and now I'm allowed to think because it feels too luxurious. It feels too gluttonous almost, just to be like, what are you doing right now? I'm just thinking. But if I'm driving, I love standing in line. Like that's like before we got on here, I ran and got coffee really quickly. And I was like, oh man, I hope there's not a long line. But then I get there and there's a long line. And I was like, this is awesome. Because I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing right now, but I get to rest at the same time. It's like encapsulated. I could just sit. So I just go into screensaver mode and I was able to chill out because I'm in line. And I get the same thing from driving, then I'm allowed to think. And it's uninterrupted thinking. So like if you have a novel or something, you can think out the entire thing on like a trip from here to LA. You can have a whole novel ready, basically. But I think that like in normal society, like in our days, like it's just constant interruption, constant, and you're expected to respond to these interruptions too. So I would put driving as part of my process.
I would actually say that the phone is the worst whenever I'm trying to get anything like written. It's
Yeah.
the worst because I definitely think I noticed the switch over when, because there was a long period of time where you were mostly using your cell phone for text messages and phone calls, and that was it, and playing like an 8-bit game or something. But it was
Mm.
sometime during the period when I was in film school when we started using them for maps, email, and photos for continuity. And
Right.
that's when my relationship with my phone changed. Because at that point, not only could anybody get a hold of you through 6 different apps at the same time, but people started expecting you to answer everything immediately because
Yeah.
they knew that it was something that was on your person. And so,
Yeah. I'm so over that. I'm so
yeah,
over
you
that.
kind of just have to throw your phone away sometimes to get anything done. Or, like, for me, I like to write at night because there's so few other people that are going to bother me at that time.
Yeah. I love that.
It sounds like you're mostly a day writer, though. You mostly write during the day.
I was always a night rider. Always. Film screwed me up, man. Film has me waking up at 4 or 5, 6 in the morning, and now I've been all screwed up for a while now. But yeah, it was always a night thing. So I would like to actually get back to writing at night because there are no interruptions and you can just feel the world is quiet.
Yeah,
It's your neighborhood. Something is quiet, you know?
yeah.
Yeah, but no, I was a day writer on this one. You're right. What are you writing right now? Are you writing a short film?
I'm writing a short film. I'm not very far along in it. It was something that we were hoping to shoot in Las Vegas, Nevada. And it's about this cult in the desert that calls this screaming star down to earth, and it lands in downtown Las Vegas, and they have to go find it.
I love it.
That's what I'm writing right now.
I
For
love
me,
it so much.
it's always this. I always start with some kind of visual thing, um, and then it's like, and then I feel like the writing part is me playing detective to figure out how anything like that happens, you know.
Right.
But yeah, it's like there's just so many visual things in it for me, like these like red robed characters that where you never see their faces with all the neon lights of Las Vegas behind them. There's something about
Yeah.
the images that are just like sparkling in my head. So it's like I'm still in the mystery of trying to figure out how it happens or why it happens.
Yeah. You use supporting documents for it.
Showing up for the criticisms before it's done.
All right. No, you just gotta make it. Oh, I can't wait to read it and maybe go to Vegas with you if you let me.
Yes, I would love that.
Yeah.
Um, have you had an opportunity to talk to anybody you know that's read the book to get um, their response to the work?
So like I'm thrilled that people have finished it. I am like, and I'm actually like surprised, not because I was like, oh, this is gonna be difficult to get through or anything, but just it's like you wonder sometimes how much people are reading these days, I guess, you know. Um, but so for me, like a surprising amount of people have contacted me and said, oh, I've just finished it. There was a friend earlier, a friend from a long, long time ago. And she's like, I just finished it in time for this interview, you know? So there have been people contacting me, which is really cool. However, uh, no is the answer. I haven't talked with anybody other than you a tiny bit last week, about the story or what happens in it or anything like that. So, but that's actually also really fine. That people can keep it in their imaginations
Well,
if
it's
they want.
still yours for the moment until you start hearing other people's response. It's yours until it's somebody else's. So I guess
That's
enjoy it
true.
while it lasts, because once those things start coming through, you're sharing it with everybody who's read it at that point.
You're right. It becomes not yours so much anymore. It's
Yeah.
true.
So are you in a state of mind where you're thinking about the next one, or are you still enjoying the accomplishment of this one and letting that rest?
Um, I am thinking about other books. Yeah. um, there's something that Julia Cameron said, and although thankfully everybody's been really wonderful with this book coming out, so really like really wonderful. But she says that it's hard to hit a moving target, you know? And so like when I'm working out, like whatever insecurities I have about my writing or stories or even how I promote or whether or not I promote all of that stuff, I just think to myself, it's hard to hit a moving target, you know? So people can read this book. I hope that they will. Um, and then while they're thinking about that book, I'm already on to the next thing, you know? So I have some ideas. I'm not sure which one will happen. It's like I always figure like in a sense it's up to me, like, well, which one do I want to do? But I don't know always which one I'm gonna want to do, you
No,
know?
it's not up to you. I
So
would say it's like the characters, whoever's screaming the loudest comes next.
that is what it is, you know? Um, absolutely. I feel like it's like, oh wow, I just realized that the image that just came to my head was basically like Old Man in the Sea. But I was like, it's like fishing, you know, you fish, you throw out your line, and then there's like this huge thing that it ends up pulling you. You know, like you're trying to pull it in, but it pulls you. And that's so I have like two ideas right now that are kind of pulling me. I kind of have this idea of doing this like more like novella um from Alexia's point of view.
Okay.
Um, that would be before this book. Just something like small, like, hey, get to know Alexia a little bit better. How did she end up in this situation? You know, so I think that could be fun. Just like something small to put out there. And then I don't know, yeah. Maybe I'm not ready to talk about the other ones, but to answer your question, yeah, I think I'll be writing more novels, and then I have ones that I wrote in the past that I'm thinking about rewriting and adding some maturity to them, I hope.
Are you able to write productively when you're working, or do you think you're going to need to come across like another break, like the end of a project, before you're able to really dig in?
Mostly the latter. Like I usually have to wait. That's one thing that's great about film is it ends. Your shows end finally, and you can do stuff you want to do. I will probably have to wait. I mean, I guess historically what I've done is I'll find that on because like so again for people who aren't, you know, our friends in the industry or something, it's like we can work anywhere between 50 and 80 hours a week, Monday through Friday, sometimes 6 days a week. And so it could be hard to get anything else done. But right now I'm just like working 50 hours a week. So
But
I
even
don't know.
off, I feel like you're always still trying to solve problems that are that just require your mind to continue pulling it apart and pulling it apart. So even though like you're clocking in and like expected to be there 50 or 80 hours a week, you're kind of never off the clock. You're always trying to work
Right.
your way through things because everything
Yeah.
happens in such a finite amount of time that all your brain power has to get at all the obstacles to make sure that you can get things done in time, it feels like.
No, totally. Yeah. I mean, I agree. And then yeah, at the same time I've had to figure out how to shut that off, you know, just be like, okay, this like because I love making movies. I love it, you know. Like at the same time, I don't like to feel owned. You know, like I got this one life, I want to own as much of it as I can.
See, I think some of my best ideas come from when I'm working for other people.
Really? Yeah, that's
You
cool.
put all this creative energy out. Let's say you're designing a project for somebody else and you're pitching them an idea for how you think you can express that character in where they're living, and they're like they don't really like your idea, and so you like love your own idea, and you put a pin in it, and now you've got this little Easter egg somewhere that you can like revisit and
Yeah.
put around to fit a new world. So it's like I do feel like I'm coming up with ideas for myself all the time, which are normally just ideas rejected by other directors. But
I love that. Yeah.
uh, but I'm not productive in like getting things fully written or realized because I just feel like I can't take the time for it.
Yeah. Yeah, you got to do it post show for
Yeah.
the most part. Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, this has been great. Thank you, Laura, for doing this.
All right. Well, it's been so great to talk to you. Thanks, everybody who has stayed through this and listened to us up until this point. You can get Kendra's book on wildmansbooks.com. All the books on the website are 10% off right now, and anything over $25 is free shipping.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for watching and for listening. And thank you, Laura, for asking us to do this. It's been a real treat. I hope that anybody who does get stitches enjoys it. Thank you.
Thank you.